Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back over 3,000 years into an Egyptian village, where ordinary men and women live lives filled with hard work, strange traditions, and surprising little joys. We're talking about bread baked in clay ovens that tasted of desert smoke, fishermen braving the Nile with nets made of papyrus, children playing games that haven't been seen for centuries, and neighbors gathering under blazing sun to share gossip and stories. It's the world of the everyday Egyptians, the people history often forgets, but whose lives built the foundation of an empire. Before you get comfortable, now dim the lights and take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. It's the banks of the Nile, around 1500 BC. The air is already warm, even though the sun has only just begun to rise. A faint glow washes over the horizon, painting the mudbrick walls of a village in hues of gold and soft amber. This is no palace city, no temple ground. This is a place where ordinary Egyptians live: farmers, potters, bakers, fishermen, the beating heart of Egypt. The village is small, perhaps no more than a cluster of 50 to 100 houses, each one pressed close to the other, shoulder to shoulder like neighbors sharing secrets. The homes are made of mud bricks, baked in the sun. They're not majestic or carved in stone like the pyramids. They're humble, fragile even, but they're alive. And within those walls, families sleep, dream, and stir to the rhythm of the Nile. The narrow lanes between the homes are little more than beaten dirt paths. They twist and turn, creating small passageways where children will later chase each other, where donkeys will pass loaded with baskets, and where neighbors will exchange whispers about the day's events. The village is a living organism, and each mudbrick home, each courtyard, each workshop is a cell within that body. Now, take a slow step inside. The houses are compact, usually just a couple of rooms. The roof is flat and often used as an extra space for sleeping on hot nights. Inside, the floors are packed earth. There's little furniture, perhaps a low stool, a reed mat, a few clay jars storing water or grain. Simple, yes, but everything has purpose. Nothing is wasted in a land where the desert presses in from all sides. In the corner of one such home, you can see the flicker of embers in a small clay oven. The faint smell of smoke still lingers from yesterday's bread. A woman stirs, adjusting her headscarf, ready to begin the long work of the day. She doesn't live in a world of luxury, but she holds the rhythms of survival in her hands. Kneading dough, drawing water, tending children. And outside, the men of the village are already awake. Their lives revolve around the Nile, its water, its floods, its generosity, and its dangers. Some will go to the fields, where the dark silt left by the river's floods makes the soil fertile beyond measure. Others will prepare their nets for fishing, hoping to pull enough to feed their family, and trade the rest in the village market. The Nile is more than a river. To the village, it is life itself, a God-given form, winding through the desert like a vein of eternity. The sounds of the morning begin to rise. You can hear it. The braying of donkeys, the clatter of clay pots, the soft voices of women gossiping as they grind barley with stone. A child begins to cry. Another bursts into laughter as he chases a goat through a dusty lane. It's not the silence of a grand temple hall. It's the murmur of life itself, messy, noisy, alive. And yet, even here, in this humble place, the gods are never far away. Look above the doorways. Small charms hang there, tiny protective amulets shaped like the eye of Horus or the scarab beetle. These villagers may not serve as priests in golden temples, but they live their faith daily, in every prayer whispered to morning sun, in every offering left in the small household shrine. Now imagine the smells. It is not perfume or incense drifting from a palace. Instead, it is a heavy scent of earth after irrigation, the smoke of bread ovens, the sharp tang of fish drying in the sun, and the faint sweetness of date palms growing near the village edge. It is the smell of life carried on the desert breeze. By mid-morning, the village lanes are alive. farmers carry tools made of wood and bronze, heading to the fields beyond the walls. Women gather near communal ovens to bake flat loaves of bread. Children fetch water in clay jars, struggling under the weight but proud to help. Elderly men sit in shaded corners, watching the bustle, telling stories of floods and harvests gone by. And through it all, the Nile flows silently, just beyond the edge of the village. Its surface glimmers in the sunlight, a constant reminder of both abundance and danger. Crocodiles lurk in its waters. The floods can drown as easily as they can nourish. But the river is also the reason these villages exist at all. Without it, there is nothing but sand. Think about it. These villages, humble, ordinary, with a backbone of Egypt. The temples, the pyramids, the golden coffins of pharaohs, all those wonders could not exist without places like this. Without the bread baked in clay ovens, without the grain stored in mudbrick granaries, without the fish caught at dawn, there would be no empire. These villagers may not be remembered by name, but their work kept the pharaoh's world alive. Life here was hard. The sun was merciless, the labor endless, but the village also held laughter, festivals, music. In the evenings, neighbors would gather in courtyards, sharing beer made from barley, telling stories of gods and spirits. They would laugh, sing, dance, reminding themselves that life was more than toil. The beating heart of the village was not in its mud brick walls, nor in its narrow lanes, but in the people, in mothers teaching daughters how to knead dough, in fathers teaching sons how to mend nets, in children playing with clay toys shaped like animals, in elders passing down wisdom by firelight. This was not the Egypt of monuments and kings. This was the Egypt of humanity, fragile, fleeting, but eternal in its rhythm. And so, as we stand in this village at dawn, listening to the sounds of life, we begin to understand. History is not only written in stone, it is also written in breadcrumbs on a reed mat, in the muddy footprint of children, in the laughter of neighbors echoing down narrow lanes. This is the beating heart of an Egyptian village, and it still whispers to us across the millennia. The first light of dawn breaks across the desert. For the villagers, this isn't just a rising of the sun. It's the daily rebirth of a god. Ra, the great solar deity, emerges once more from his nightly voyage through the underworld, rising triumphant to bring warmth, light, and life to Egypt. And here, in a simple mud brick home, a family awakens with him. The morning begins with silence. For a moment, before the village stirs, there is only the faint call of water birds from the Nile and the soft creak of palm fronds swaying in the breeze. Then, slowly, movement begins. A mother untangles herself from a woven reed mat. A father stretches his arms, sore from the previous day's labor. Children murmur sleepily, rubbing their eyes, eager yet reluctant to rise. Inside the home, light filters through the doorway, painting the packed earthen floor in golden streaks. This glow is more than illumination. It is divine presence. The Egyptians didn't see sunrise as just another part of the day. To them, the sun was Ra's living eye, watching over creation, warming crops, protecting people from the eternal threat of chaos. To rise with the sun was to rise with a god. And so, before work begins, there is ritual. In the corner of the room stands a tiny shrine, no taller than a man's hand. Perhaps it is just a clay figure. Perhaps a painted wooden box containing a protective amulet. The mother sprinkles a few drops of water before it, whispering a short prayer for health and protection. The father bows his head, murmuring words of thanks for another day. Even the children are taught to touch the amulet reverently, tracing the carved shape of the scarab beetle or the eye of Horus. It may be small, but this moment is powerful. The grand priests in Thebes or Heliopolis may sing elaborate hymns at sunrise, but here in the village, the devotion is quieter, yet no less sincere. For the farmer or fisherman, every sunrise carries a question. Will today bring bounty or hardship? Only R.A. knows the answer. Step outside, and the village itself awakens like a living thing. From every doorway, people emerge. Women wrap linen shawls around their shoulders, shielding themselves from the morning chill before the heat of the day descends. Men tighten their belts and lift tools they've mended in the night. The air is filled with greetings, short, practical, but carrying warmth. The sun rises on you, and on you as R.A. wills it. The timing of daily life is woven into this rhythm. Egyptians didn't have clocks in the modern sense, but the cycle of Ra's journey across the sky was all they needed. His rising told them when to begin. His descent told them when to rest, and his absence at night was a reminder of the dangers lurking in darkness. Time was not measured by numbers. It was measured by divinity. And yet, these villagers are not abstractly pious. Their prayers are practical. A fisherman ties his net, muttering under his breath, asking R.A. to guide fish into his path. A mother, holding a sickly child, raises her eyes to the brightening sky, hoping the god's warmth will heal the little one. Even children learn to lift their faces toward the horizon, whispering small wishes, perhaps for a new toy or for a day without chores. The sun continues to climb, and with it, the village grows louder. Roosters crow, donkeys bray, and the clatter of stone grinding barley fills the air. Women crouch over large grinding stones, pushing and pulling smaller stones to crush the grain into flour. Their muscles ache from the effort, yet the rhythm is steady. Push, pull, a motion repeated countless times across centuries. For them, this labor is not just drudgery. It is part of keeping Ra's gift alive. Grain is his blessing, drawn from the fertile silt he nourishes with his heat. To grind it, to bake it, to eat it, these are acts of reverence, even if done silently. Every loaf of bread is a quiet hymn to the sun. The men of the household are also at work. Some gather baskets and head for the fields, where the crops bend lightly under the morning breeze. Others prepare to walk toward the river. Fishing boats, simple reed or wooden vessels, are untied from their moorings. Nets are checked again, patched with careful hands. To risk the Nile is to risk one's life, but with R.A. shining above, the fishermen feel courage. Children, too, have their morning tasks. The youngest fetch water in small clay jars, wobbling as they balance the weight. Older children help herd animals, goats, sheep, donkeys, leading them toward pasture. All of them glance skyward now and then, their eyes squinting at the brilliance of Ra's rising disk. They are taught from their earliest days that this light is not ordinary. It is holy, eternal, protective. To ignore it is to risk misfortune. Even the animals, in Egyptian eyes, were tied to Ra's cycle. The rooster's crow was seen as a natural herald of dawn, a creature instinctively aligned with the god's journey. Cats, often found in households, were not merely pets but guardians, creatures who, like R.A., fought against chaos, whether in the form of snakes or unseen spirits. As the morning deepens, the household settles into its tasks. The smell of baking bread fills the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of dates and figs. The sound of hammers from a nearby workshop echoes as artisans begin shaping wood or pottery. And overhead, the sun rises higher, its heat already felt on the skin. But before work consumes the day, many pause for one final acknowledgement of the divine. On rooftops, villagers stretch their arms toward the sky, greeting R.A. as he climbs. They know his journey will be long, crossing the heavens until dusk, but they take a moment to send him strength, to ask him to watch over them as he travels. It is a small act, yet one deeply human. The desire to be noticed by something greater, to believe that God sees him just as they see him. To us, thousands of years later, it may seem like superstition, but pause for a moment. Imagine living in a world where survival depends on forces beyond your control. The flooding of the Nile, the fertility of the soil, the movement of the sun. Wouldn't you, too, bow your head at dawn, whisper a prayer, and hope that the universe noticed? As R.A. climbs higher, the village shifts into full life. The morning prayers fade into memory, replaced by the noise of labor. But the spirit of that ritual lingers. Each man and woman carries Ra's blessing in their heart, whether spoken aloud or left unvoiced. The day has begun, guided by the god of the sun, and the rhythm of life flows on. The sun is now fully risen, and with it, the village has come alive. The morning air carries a symphony of sounds. Donkeys braying, birdsong tumbling from the reeds along the Nile, the faint clatter of wooden tools and grinding stones. But among these sounds, one stands above all, the low hum of women's voices as they prepare the morning meal. If you were to walk through the narrow lanes of the village right now, you would pass house after house, each one with its door open to the rising day. Inside, families gather in courtyards and kitchens, though kitchen here means little more than a clay oven pressed against a wall, its mouth glowing faintly with embers from a fire tended since dawn. The smell of baking bread drifts outward, warm and earthy, mingling with the sweet tang of dates and the sharper scent of onions. It is the perfume of an Egyptian morning. For the ancient villagers, breakfast was not a lavish affair. They did not sit before golden platters or feasts fit for pharaohs. Instead, their first meal was simple, practical, and shaped by the land itself. Flat loaves of bread, often coarse with husks of barley or emmer wheat, were the foundation. This bread was dense and hearty, meant to fill the stomach and provide energy for the long hours of labor ahead. Alongside it, there might be small bowls of lentils, a few figs, perhaps cucumbers or radishes pulled fresh from fields. If fortune smiled, there could be honey or even a small portion of fish caught from a Nile at dawn. Picture a family gathered around such a meal. They sit on reed mats laid across the packed earthen floor. Children press shoulder to shoulder, parents dividing portions with care. There are no silver spoons, no elaborate plates, just clay bowls and hands. Bread is torn, dipped into lentil stew, shared between siblings. A child chews thoughtfully on a fig, sticky juice running down their chin, while their mother wipes it away with the edge of her linen dress. This gathering is more than nourishment. It is the first moment of the day when the household comes together. Here, laughter mingles with the clatter of clay jars. Here, children ask their fathers where they will work today, fields or fishing. Here, mothers remind daughters of the tasks that await. Fetching water, tending goats, learning the rhythm of the grindstone. The morning meal is also a time of storytelling. Elders, sitting cross-legged on mats, often recount short tales as bread is passed around. Sometimes these are family memories of harvests long past, of years when the Nile's flood was generous, or years when it was cruel. Sometimes they are stories of gods, how Isis tricked Ra into revealing his secret name, or how the sun god battles the serpent Apophis in the underworld each night. For the children, these stories are as nourishing as the food itself. They remind them that life is not only toil, but also part of a grander tale woven by the gods. And then there is the drink. Beer, though it may sound strange to us today, was a staple of the Egyptian morning meal. But this was not the sharp, bitter beer of modern breweries. Egyptian beer was thick, almost porridge-like, made from partially baked barley bread that was crumbled into jars, mixed with water, and left to ferment. It was sweet, nutritious, and filled the belly as much as it quenched thirst. Even children drank it, for water carried from the Nile was not always clean. Beer was safer, sacred even, believed to be a gift of the gods. Watch as a father lifts a clay cup, handing it first to his wife, then to his children. The liquid is cloudy, flecked with grain, but to them it tastes of comfort. They sip, laugh, and set the cup down beside the bread. This simple act, passing the cup, sharing the drink, is a moment of unity. Not every family enjoys the same spread. Of course, poverty weighs heavy in any age. Some mornings, a household might only have coarse bread and water, perhaps a handful of beans if they are lucky. Yet, even in scarcity, the act of gathering remains sacred. A family sitting shoulder to shoulder, breaking bread together, is a ritual as vital as prayer to Ra. In the courtyard next door, another family's morning unfolds. A grandmother coaxes a child to eat, her voice warm but firm. She places a small piece of onion on the bread, telling the boy that onions will keep him strong. Onions were treasured in Egypt, not just as food, but as symbols of eternity, their layers representing the endless cycle of life. The child chews reluctantly, then grins, onion juice stinging his eyes. Laughter rises, spilling into the lane. The social nature of these meals is important. In a village, walls are thin and lives are intertwined. Neighbors hear each other's laughter, smell each other's bread, and sometimes share what little they have. If one family lacks grain, another may offer some. If a fisherman has caught more than his household can eat, he may trade with a neighbor for dates or vegetables. The morning meal thus strengthens not only families, but the bonds of the entire village. As the meal progresses, the pace is unhurried. Unlike the frantic mornings of our modern lives, there are no clocks ticking down the minutes. The only measured time is the sun's climb in the sky, and for now, it is still gentle. Families eat slowly, savoring their food, exchanging words, letting the warmth of the morning settle over them. But there is one final element to these gatherings: gratitude. After eating, many households pause for a quiet moment of thanks, to Ra for his light, to the Nile for its bounty, to the earth for its gifts. Some leave a small offering, a piece of bread, or a few drops of beer, at the household shrine. It is a gesture of humility, an acknowledgement that survival is not guaranteed, but granted. Now the meal ends. Children lick the last crumbs from their fingers. Mothers wipe clay bowls clean with scraps of bread. Fathers rise, stretching their backs, ready to shoulder their tools. The reed mats are rolled up, the remains of the food set aside, and the household scatters into the rhythm of the day. The fields call, the river waits, the animals brave for attention. But for a brief moment, before each member of the household steps into their separate tasks, they have shared this, a morning meal, a moment of unity, a reminder that though life is hard, it is also bound together by family and community. This is the heartbeat of daily life in an ancient Egyptian village. Not the monuments of kings, not the treasures of tombs, but the laughter of children over bread, the comfort of beer shared at dawn, and the warmth of a family gathering beneath the watchful eye of the sun god. The morning meal may be finished, but the work of bread never truly ends. In ancient Egypt, bread was not just food. It was a very backbone of life. Every man, woman, and child relied on it, from the humblest farmer in a mudbrick house to the pharaoh reclining in his palace. And in the village, the responsibility of keeping this lifeline alive fell most often to the women, whose hands carried the memory of generations in the way they kneaded, baked, and fed their families with the daily loaves. Step into a village courtyard, and you will see it. The heart of the home, a clay oven shaped like an upturned jar, its mouth glowing with embers. The oven has been here for years, patched and mended as cracks appear, but always burning, always alive. Beside it, low grinding stones are set out on the ground. A woman kneels there now, her back bent, her arms moving with steady rhythm. She is grinding barley into flour, the coarse grains breaking beneath the pressure of the stone. It is hard work, demanding and endless, but her movements are practiced, almost graceful, as if she has done this every day of her life. Because she has. Listen closely, and you can hear the sound. A scraping rhythm, stone against stone, like a heartbeat. Push, pull, push, pull. Dust rises with each stroke, coating her hands, her dress, her hair. It settles on the floor, clings to her skin, even drifts into her breath. Grinding grain is not a clean task, but it is essential. Without it, there is no bread. Often, this labor is shared. Beside her, a daughter works on a smaller stone, learning the trade of her mother. She fumbles, her strokes uneven, but the mother gently corrects her, guiding her hands until the rhythm steadies. In this way, knowledge is passed down, not through books or schools, but through the weight of stone, the feel of grain, the warmth of the hearth. The flour produced is not fine and white as we know it today. It is coarse, flecked with husks, sometimes even with grains of sand. When baked, it will be dense, heavy, filling. Archaeologists, studying the teeth of ancient Egyptians, have found them worn down, ground away by the grit in their bread. Every bite carried not only nourishment, but also the desert itself. Yet to the villagers, this was life, and they cherished it. Now the dough must be made. Water is fetched from a clay jar. cool from a morning's draw at the river. A handful of salt is added, sometimes herbs if they are available, sometimes a drizzle of honey on festival days. The flour is mixed, kneaded with strong hands, pressed and folded again and again until it becomes smooth. Children may be allowed to help, their small fists punching the dough with laughter, though more often they are shooed away for slowing the work. And then comes the baking. Flat discs of dough are placed on hot stones or against the inner walls of the oven, where they puff and darken, filling the courtyard with a rich, smoky smell of baking bread. The air itself seems to grow heavy with it, clinging to the skin, seeping into the clothes. Neighbors passing by can smell it too, and it becomes part of the village's shared life, the scent of sustenance drifting through the lanes. This is not just labor. It is ritual. The act of baking bread carries layers of meaning, both practical and sacred. Bread was not only food, it was offering. In temples, loaves were given to the gods. In tombs, they were placed beside the dead, meant to feed them in the afterlife. And here in the village, even the simplest loaf was a reminder of divine blessing. Without Ra's sun, without the Nile's floods, without the earth's soil, there could be no grain. And without grain, no bread. Each loaf is a hymn in clay and ash. Watch the women as they work. They are not silent. They talk, laugh, sing, grinding, kneading, baking. It is exhausting work, but it is also social. A neighbor may come by, carrying her own basket of flour, and join them. Together they exchange gossip, news of who is sick, who is expecting a child, who quarreled at the market the day before. Their voices weave together like threads, binding the community as surely as the bread binds their families. Children hover nearby, waiting for the first fresh loaves. A small piece is sometimes broken off and given to them, hot from the oven, the crust still smoking. They bite eagerly, burning their fingers, laughing as they chew. For them, bread is comfort, warmth, love. For their mothers, it is responsibility fulfilled. But bread is not only for the table. It is also currency. In a land where coinage is not yet common, loaves can be traded for goods, for services, even for labor. A fisherman might bring a basket of fish to a neighbor and leave with a stack of bread. A craftsman might mend a stool and be paid in loaves. The oven, then, is not just a household tool. It is an engine of economy, a source of power in its own small way. The bread-baking rituals also reveal the role of women in Egyptian life. They may not stand in temples or lead armies, but their labor sustains everything. They are keepers of the hearth, preservers of tradition, guardians of the family's survival. In their hands, grain becomes life, and life becomes continuity. Without them, the empire itself could not stand. As the morning deepens, the work continues. Loaves are stacked in baskets, wrapped in linen, set aside for the day's meals. Some are stored in clay jars to last longer, though in truth, bread is best when fresh. The oven cools, the embers fade, but soon enough they will be stoked again, for bread is a cycle without end. And when the work is done, the women rest for a moment in the shade. Their arms ache, their backs are sore, flour dusts their skin, but there is pride in their faces. They have completed their task, fed their families, and upheld a ritual as old as Egypt itself. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of their voices across time. The scrape of grinding stones, the laughter of children, the crackle of ovens. It is a sound that has not vanished. For though the pyramids may crumble and temples may fall, the making of bread remains eternal, carried forward in kitchens around the world, in every loaf that rises, in every family gathered to eat. This is the heart of Egypt. This is where women, with flour-dusted hands and weary smiles, shape the very survival of their world. And in every loaf of bread, their legacy still lingers. The smell of fresh bread lingers in the air as the men of the village shoulder their tools and step out into the morning light. While the hearth is the domain of women, the fields and the river belong to the men. Their day is one of sweat, callous hands, and endless labor beneath the watchful eye of the sun god Ra. Yet their work is not only for themselves or their families. It is for the entire kingdom. For in Egypt, every loaf, every fish, every stalk of grain ultimately served the pharaoh himself. Step outside the cluster of mudbrick houses, and the land stretches wide. To the west lies the desert, eternal and lifeless, a golden sea that threatens to swallow all. To the east, the Nile glimmers, winding like a blue ribbon, its waters breathing life into the soil. Between river and desert lies the fertile floodplain, dark with silt deposited each year when the Nile swells its banks. Here is where the men bend their backs in labor. A farmer steps into his plot of land, wooden hoe slung over his shoulder. His fields are small, perhaps no larger than a few dozen paces across. Yet they are precious. The soil is rich, black, and heavy with promise. Already, green shoots of barley and emmer wheat rise from the earth, trembling in the morning breeze. These crops will become bread, beer, offerings to the gods, and taxes to the pharaoh's storehouses. The tools are simple: wooden hoes, plows pulled by oxen, baskets woven from reeds. Yet in these simple tools lies the backbone of civilization. Without them, the field would lie empty and Egypt would starve. Farmers bend low, scraping, planting, weeding. Sweat runs down their faces, dripping into the soil. Their hands are rough, scarred from rope and wood, their bodies hardened by years of toil. And still they sing. Low, rhythmic songs rise from the fields, chants that match the rhythm of their work. They sing to Ra, to the Nile, to the crops themselves, urging life from the earth. Not far away, another group of men prepare their nets along the riverbank. Fishing is both blessing and danger. The Nile teems with life. Catfish perch tilapia and eels, but it also hides crocodiles, their eyes glinting just above the surface, and hippopotamuses, whose power can overturn boats in an instant. Yet the fishermen know these waters, as well as they know the lines of their own hands. Their boats are simple, made of papyrus reeds bound together or wooden planks fitted with care. Nets are woven from flax, patched and repatched until every hole is sealed. With practiced ease, they push their boats into the water, poles driving against the riverbed, guiding them into deeper channels. The air smells of silt and fish, the water cool against their skin. Nets are cast wide, their arcs flashing briefly in the sun before splashing down. The men wait, watching the ripples spread, listening for the slap of tails beneath the surface. Then, with a sharp pull, they draw the nets back in, heavy now with thrashing silver bodies. The catch is hauled into the boat, slippery and wriggling, flopping against the planks. Some will be eaten fresh today, others salted and dried for trade. The men laugh, shout, tease one another, but always they keep an eye on the water, wary of what lurks beneath. Fishing is not merely sustenance. Like farming, it is duty. Much of the catch will never see the family hearth. Instead, it will be taken to the village market, weighed, tallied, and claimed as tax. For in Egypt, all land, all water, all bounty belongs ultimately to the pharaoh. The villagers are but stewards, their labor feeding not only themselves but also the temples, the soldiers, the officials, and the great storehouses that keep the kingdom strong. Taxes. This is the shadow that hangs over every farmer and fisherman. It is not coin they pay, but goods. A portion of every harvest, every catch, every jar of beer or basket of flax must be surrendered. Scribes arrive in the village, reed pens in hand, scrolls of papyrus unfurled to record the yield. They are precise, unyielding, their eyes sharp as hawks. If a man claims his field produced less than expected, the scribes measure it. If a fisherman insists the river was poor, they check his nets. And if the tally falls short, there are consequences. Picture a farmer standing before a scribe, sweat dripping down his brow as he offers his baskets of grain. His children watch anxiously from the doorway of their home. He knows that if the scribe deems his payment insufficient, punishment will follow: floggings, fines, perhaps even the seizure of livestock. Taxes are not merely obligation. They are survival. To fail is to risk ruin. And yet, the villagers endure. They bend their backs, cast their nets, surrender their shares, and continue on. For them, this is not injustice. It is the way of things. The pharaoh is not merely a ruler. He is divine, the living embodiment of Horus, the earthly presence of the gods. To feed the pharaoh is to feed Egypt itself. Their labor is not just survival, it is sacred duty. Back in the fields, the sun climbs higher. Farmers pause, wiping their brows, leaning on their hoes. They share water from clay jars, pass bits of bread, laugh at a joke murmured under the breath. Their work is endless, yet they find joy in small moments. In the sight of green shoots sprouting strong, in the feel of cool mud between their toes, in the rhythm of voices raised together in song. The fishermen, too, take pride in their work. The Nile is dangerous, yes, but it is also bountiful. To pull a heavy net from its waters is to feel the blessing of the gods in one's hands. The fish glisten in the sun, scales flashing like jewels, and for a moment, the men forget their sore arms, their weary backs, their endless taxes. For a moment, they are simply men, alive, working, laughing, surviving. And so the day stretches on. Fields rustle with the sound of labor. Nets splash against the river. Scribes tally their scrolls. The empire breathes through the sweat of its villagers. Every loaf of bread, every jar of beer, every dried fish is a brick in the great invisible foundation upon which temples rise. Armies march in Pharaoh's reign. It is easy to look at Egypt and see only monuments, pyramids gleaming in the sun, statues towering above the sand, golden tombs hidden in the Valley of the Kings. But those wonders could not exist without the men in the fields, the fishermen on the Nile, the villagers who rose with the dawn and bent their backs beneath the sun. They are the unremembered hands that build a civilization. As the sun reaches its height, the men pause again. They stretch their aching arms, look up at the blazing sky, and breathe deep. They know the day is far from over. More grain must be harvested, more fish pulled from the river, more tallies made by the scribes. But for now, they savor a moment of rest. And then, with a deep breath, they return to work, because in Egypt, work never truly ends. If you follow the laughter, it will lead you away from the weary grunts of the fields and the splash of fishermen's nets, into the open courtyards and narrow alleys of the village. There, between mudbrick walls and shady patches of palm, life feels different. Here, it belongs to the children. The Egyptian sun is hot, but children never seem to notice. Barefoot, quick and restless, they run through the dust with an energy that seems endless. Their bellies may be a little round, their hair shaved close except for the single sidelock that marks their youth, but their eyes gleam with mischief and wonder. Childhood in an Egyptian village was not a time of leisure, but it was also not without joy. Even in a world of toil and duty, the young found space for play, for games, and for learning the ways of their people. For though the adults bent their backs in labor for the pharaoh, they carried within the memory of laughter like this, and they knew that to raise children was to shape Egypt's future. A group of boys chase one another, kicking a ball made from tightly bound leather scraps. The ball bounces unevenly against the hard earth, but that hardly matters. The air rings with their shouts, their shrieks of triumph, their playful taunts. Another group squats in the dirt with carved sticks, tossing knucklebones from the legs of goats and sheep, gambling for pebbles and seeds, playing games that are as old as the desert sands. Girls, meanwhile, twirl in a circle, singing chants passed down from mothers to daughters. Their voices rise high and thin, carried by the warm breeze. They clap hands in rhythm, weave flowers into garlands, and cradle dolls shaped from clay or cloth scraps. Some dolls are simple, lumps of mud with a painted face. Others are carved with care, their hair made of string or beads, their bodies adorned with scraps of fabric. Each is a treasure, cherished, kept close at night beneath a thin reed mat. Play was not idle. Through games, children learned balance, rhythm, strength, and quickness. Through songs, they absorbed the words of their people, the stories of gods, the wisdom of ancestors. And through imitation, tiny hoes carved from wood, miniature fishing nets, toy boats made from papyrus stalks. They learned the roles they would one day take as adults. But life was never only play. By the time children could walk steadily, they were already drawn into the rhythm of work. A little boy might follow his father to the fields, carrying a small basket, dropping seeds into furrows. A little girl might sit beside her mother, helping knead dough or fetch water from a river. Their hands were small, their movements clumsy, but they were learning. Each task was both responsibility and lesson, a way to prepare them for the endless duties that awaited. Education in Egypt was not limited to labor. Words carried weight, and those who mastered them wielded power. Most children of the village would never learn to read or write, for papyrus and ink were the domain of scribes. Yet every parent knew the value of literacy, and many dreamed of their sons being chosen to study. To send a boy to the scribal school meant sacrifice, for it took him away from the fields. But it also promised a future authority and comfort, free from the endless back-breaking toil of farming. Picture a young boy crouched in the corner of a small classroom, reed pen in hand, scratching carefully onto a broken piece of pottery. The teacher, stern and watchful, paces behind him. The boy's fingers are smudged with ink, his shoulders tense, but his eyes shine. Around him, other boys recite aloud, their voices carrying phrases of wisdom, hymns to the gods, or instructions on proper behavior. Do not speak arrogantly to your superiors, they chant. Be diligent, be respectful. Words endure longer than stone. For these children, learning is both privilege and burden. Mistakes are punished, sometimes with the sting of a reed across the back. Yet they understand that each line they copy, each lesson they memorize, brings them closer to a future status, perhaps even a role in the palace or the temple. In a world where most children inherit the calluses of their parents, to master the pen is to grasp destiny itself. Meanwhile, daughters rarely enter the world of scribes. Their lessons are different. They learn to grind grain, weave cloth, care for younger siblings, and manage a household. Yet this, too, was no small thing. For in Egypt, women held more rights than in many other ancient lands. They could inherit, own property, and even divorce. To raise a daughter capable of managing a household was to give her strength and security. As children grow older, play begins to shift into preparation. Boys learn to fish, standing ankle-deep in the Nile shallows, practicing with small nets while older men watch and laugh. Girls practice carrying water jars on their heads, walking with a poise that will one day mark them as graceful wives. Both learn to respect the dangers around them. The crocodile lurking in the river, the scorpion hiding in the sand, the wrath of a scribe tallying taxes. Childhood is brief, yet even in their lessons, joy lingers. A boy chasing after a runaway goat bursts into laughter as he tumbles into the dust. A girl, proudly carrying a jar of water, wobbles and spills half of it, then doubles over and giggles with her friends. Their world is one of danger and duty, yes, but also of laughter, light, and simple treasures. As evening falls, children gather again, their play now softer, calmer. They sit in circles, listening to elders tell stories by flickering lamplight. Tales of Ra's journey across the sky, of Osiris and Isis, of the weighing of the heart after death. Their eyes grow wide, their breath slow. For them, these are not myths, but truths woven into the fabric of the world. Through these stories, they learn who they are and what role they will one day play in the great cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And when at last their eyelids droop and their bodies grow heavy, they lie down on reed mats, dolls clutch in their arms, the echo of games still warm in their dreams. Outside, the Nile flows on eternal, carrying with the laughter of Egypt's children into the endless night. Step to the doorway of a modest mudbrick home in an ancient Egyptian village, and you will quickly realize something extraordinary. Religion is not confined to temples of stone or the towering statues of the gods. It is here, too, woven into the daily rhythm of family life, tucked into corners, whispered into clay lamps, and strung on cords around the necks of children. In Egypt, faith was not an occasional ritual. It was a constant companion. Every act, kneading dough, grinding grain, setting out fishing nets, carried a spiritual dimension. The unseen world brushed against the visible one, and people lived in constant dialogue with it. To live without faith, without protection, was unthinkable. Near the hearth, where bread bakes and the air is warm with the scent of grain, a small niche has been carved into the wall. Inside rests a humble figurine, worn smooth by generations of hands. Some figures are shaped from clay, others carved from wood, or even fashioned in stone if the family could afford it. These are the household gods, protectors of the family and the home. Foremost among them is Bess, a squat, lion-faced dwarf with a wild mane, bulging eyes, and a tongue that sticks out in defiance of evil. He is ugly, yes, but deliberately so, for in his ugliness lies his power. Demons, snakes, and sickness shrink from his face. Mothers call upon him during childbirth. Families place his image at the foot of beds to ward off nightmares, and children wear amulets bearing his likeness, so his ferocity might shield their sleep. Bess is joined by Tauret, the great hippopotamus goddess of childbirth and fertility, with the belly of a pregnant woman, the back of a crocodile, and the paws of a lion. She looms awkward and strange. Yet to Egyptian women, she was a guardian like no other. Her image appears on wall plaques, on amulets, even scratched into potsherds, standing vigilant over expectant mothers and newborn children. Each household shrine might hold different figures, chosen according to the family's needs. A fisherman might carve a tiny image of Sobuk, the crocodile god, asking him to spare his nets and grant safe passage across the waters. A farmer might keep a token of Min, god of fertility and harvest, hoping for strong crops. Others pray to Hathor for love, to Sekhmet for protection against disease, to Isis for maternal care. But shrines were only part of the picture. Faith lived in words, too, in spells, charms, and chants muttered over daily tasks. A mother drawing water might whisper, "Keep the scorpion from my path." A father preparing a journey to the fields might murmur, "Guard my steps, great Horus, as you guard the sun." The boundary between prayer and habit was thin. Words spoken to the gods were as natural as breathing. Amulets were perhaps the most personal form of faith. These small charms, worn on the body or tucked into clothing, were believed to channel divine power directly to their wearer. Children wore egg-shaped amulets, the sign of life, to ensure health. Farmers tied scarab beetles around their necks, symbols of transformation and rebirth, invoking the dung beetle that rolled the sun across the sky. Pregnant women wore wedge-at eyes, the eye of Horus, believed to see and strike down danger before it approached. These amulets could be simple, made from clay or faience, or elaborate, crafted from precious stones. But whether costly or humble, their value lay in belief. To hold one was to carry the gods themselves upon your body, a shield against the countless unseen dangers of the world. Nighttime brought its own rituals. As darkness crept over the village and the Nile shimmered under the moonlight, families lit lamps and made offerings at their household shrines. A few crumbs of bread, a sip of beer, a pinch of salt or herbs. It was not the size of the offering that mattered, but the act itself. These gifts bound family to deity, weaving a thread between the mortal and divine. And yet, Egyptian faith was never only about great gods or formal rituals. It was deeply practical, focused on survival, protection, and harmony. Parents worried about sick children, about snakes in the fields, about floods that might destroy their harvest. The gods were not distant beings to be worshipped only in magnificent temples. They were neighbors, guardians, and at times, stern teachers. Imagine a child coughing through the night. The mother rises, panic sharp in her chest. She goes to the shrine, takes up an amulet of Tauret, and whispers spells she learned from her mother before her. By Tauret's belly, by Bess's teeth, let sickness leave this house. She burns herbs to chase away malevolent spirits, marks protective signs on the door with soot from the hearth. Every action is a plea, every gesture charged with desperation and hope. Faith also carried a sense of intimacy. In every whispered charm, in every smudge of incense. The Egyptians acknowledged that they lived in a world filled with powers unseen. Life was fragile, death never far. But with the gods' protection, the villagers felt less alone. It wasn't only crises that brought faith to life. Even joyous events, births, marriages, feasts, were laced with ritual. A woman in labor would hold amulets of taret, chants echoing through the room. Newlyweds might receive charms to bless their union with fertility. Children wore strings of beads around their necks, charms to guard their innocence. And when someone died, the household gods remained. The family would adorn the body with amulets, speak protective words, and trust that the same deities who guarded the home and life would guide the spirit into the afterlife. What makes Egyptian household faith remarkable is not its grandeur, but its intimacy. Here, in these small mudbrick rooms, you glimpse the soul of a civilization. Yes, the pharaoh built colossal temples, priests conducted elaborate ceremonies, and festivals filled the streets with song. But for the vast majority of Egyptians, faith was not about spectacle. It was about protection. It was about keeping snakes from the doorway, keeping infants alive through the night, keeping bread in the oven and laughter in the courtyard. And in these shrines, in these amulets, you see the heartbeat of Egypt itself. A people who lived not only by the Nile's waters, but also by the conviction that the divine walked among them, guarding every breath, every step, every grain of life. Picture the village after weeks of routine toil, the endless grind of grain, the tending of fields, the pulling of nets from the Nile. The days are long, the sun merciless, and life is heavy with duty. But then, almost like the rising of the river itself, something shifts. Word spreads. A festival is coming. Suddenly, the ordinary rhythm of the village stirs with anticipation. For the people of ancient Egypt, festivals were more than just entertainment. They were a release, a reminder that life was not only about survival, but also joy. At dawn, before the heat grows fierce, families gather. Farmers leave their tools in the fields. Fishermen tie up their boats. Even the animals seem to sense the change as drums begin to thrum in the distance. The festival has begun. Musical note music in the air. The first thing you would notice is the music. Egypt's festivals were filled with sound, sharp, bright, alive. Flutes made from reeds sing high above the crowd, while the deep thump of drums vibrates in your chest. Hand-held sistrums, rattling instruments sacred to Hathor, shake with a rhythmic shimmer, metal tongues clinking in patterns that seem half music, half incantation. Children laugh and clap, women ululate, and men pound hand drums until the air feels like it's pulsing. For people who spent most of their days in quiet labor, this eruption of sound was electric, a reminder that the gods delighted not only in silence, but also in celebration. Music wasn't just entertainment. It was sacred. Every note was believed to reach the ears of the gods. By playing, singing, and dancing, the villagers were not only enjoying themselves, they were inviting divine presence into their midst. Bread feasts for the living and the gods. But what is a festival without food? The narrow lanes of the village are lined with offerings. Steaming loaves of bread, flat and fragrant from the clay ovens, baskets piled with dates and figs, sticky with sweetness, roasted fish glistening with oils, and beer, always beer, brewed from barley, thick and cloudy, poured generously into clay jars. Food is shared freely, neighbors handing bread to neighbors, families offering cups of beer to strangers. But before the feasting truly begins, the gods are fed first. At makeshift altars set along the Nile's edge, villagers lay out trays of food and pour libations of beer. Some crumble bread into the waters, offering thanks to Hapi, the spirit of the Nile, for the floods that brought life to their fields. Others leave figs and honey to Hathor, goddess of music and joy, asking her to bless the dancing yet to come. In Egypt, there was no clear divide between eating for oneself and eating for the gods. To feed the gods was to ensure that the community itself would never go hungry. To share with the divine was to secure another year of abundance. Woman dancing dance of devotion and joy soon. The music stirs a crowd into movement. Dancers step forward, their ankles jingling with beaded ornaments, hips swaying in time with the drumbeat. Women balance clay pots on their heads as they twirl, a display of grace and balance that earns cheers from the crowd. Some dances are playful, children imitating the older dancers with laughter. Others are serious, ritual movements performed to honor specific deities. A group of young women might perform a slow, deliberate dance to Hathor, lifting their arms like wings, shaking their sistrums as if calling her to descend among them. The line between sacred and secular blurs. To dance with joy is to worship. To laugh with neighbors is to honor the gods. In Egypt, celebration itself was a form of prayer. And for festivals along the Nile, not all festivals were alike. Some were small village center fairs, while others spilled across the land, drawing thousands. Along the Nile, great festivals marked the calendar. The festival of Opet in Thebes, where statues of the gods Ammonius, Mut, and Khonsu were carried in grand processions from Karnak to Luxor. The beautiful festival of the valley, where families visited tombs of ancestors, bringing food, music, and light to honor the dead. Seasonal festivals celebrating the flooding of the Nile, thanking the river for its life-giving waters. Even in the humblest villages, these grand traditions echoed. Villagers might not march with pharaohs, but they carried their own small statues in procession, adorned with garlands of flowers, chanting hymns passed down for generations. Milky Way the festival night as the sun sinks. The Nile itself becomes part of the celebration. Boats, strung with garlands and lit with oil lamps, drift across the water. The flickering lights reflect in the ripples, doubling the glow so that the whole river seems to blaze. On the banks, villagers gather around fires. Storytellers recite myths of Isis searching for Osiris, of Horus avenging his father, of Ra sailing his solar bark across the sky. Children sit wide-eyed, clutching figs and cups of beer, while the elders nod, murmuring in agreement, as if they've heard these stories 1,000 times but never grow tired of them. The music does not stop. Flutes wail into the night. Drums thunder. Dancers leap and twirl by firelight. The festival becomes a blur of rhythm and shadow, joy and exhaustion. People sing until their voices crack, laugh until they can hardly stand, and drink until the earth itself seems to sway beneath them. Folded hands more than merriment, it would be easy to imagine these festivals as mere parties. But to the Egyptians, they carried deeper weight. Festivals were moments when the barrier between mortal and divine thinned. When the village gathered, when music rose and food was shared, it was believed that the gods walked among them, invisible yet near. To celebrate was to invite blessing. To dance was to honor creation itself. To feast together was to bind community, family, and faith into one unbroken circle. And for the villagers, these moments mattered. They gave relief from toil, yes, but they also reminded people that their lives were not just about survival. They were about joy, community, and connection to something eternal. Herb the morning after as dawn breaks the next day. The fires have burned low. The drums lie silent, and the Nile laps gently against the shore. Villagers stumble back to their homes, tired but smiling. Children clutch wilted flower garlands. Women gather up empty pots. Men carry the last jars of beer. Life will return to its ordinary rhythm. The grinding of grain, the fishing of nets, the labor under the blazing sun. But the memory of the festival lingers. For a little while, everyone had danced together. Everyone had been blessed by the gods. And everyone had remembered that life, no matter how harsh, could still be sweet. When the drums of the festival have faded and the ordinary days return, the village takes on its steady rhythm once again. The fishermen return to the river, the farmers to their fields, the bakers to their ovens. But while adults work, another rhythm quietly unfolds in the shaded corners of courtyards and beneath the whispering palms, the education of the young. For in ancient Egypt, knowledge was not only a luxury for scribes in temples or the children of the wealthy. Even in a humble village, the young were shaped by the lessons of elders, by stories whispered at night, and by the steady passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. Early childhood in the village. Imagine a young boy or girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old. Their heads are shaved clean for comfort and hygiene, save for one long side lock of hair that marks them as a child. They run barefoot through the dusty lanes, laughing with friends, splashing the shallows of the Nile. But childhood in Egypt was short. From an early age, children were expected to help. Little girls carried water jars balanced carefully on their heads, while boys drove goats or gathered reeds from the riverbank. The village was their classroom, and survival itself was their first teacher. By watching their parents, children absorbed skills that would shape their futures. The daughter of a potter learned to shape clay with her hands. The son of a fisherman learned how to weave nets. Knowledge was not written in books, but lived, practiced, repeated until it became part of the body. Books formal learning, the path of scribes. Yet, not all learning was practical. For some children, a different path opened, the path of the scribe. Literacy in Egypt was rare and powerful, reserved for those destined to serve in temples, palaces, or administration. Picture a small mudbrick room near the temple, the village's closest thing to a school. Boys sit cross-legged on reed mats, wooden boards in their laps, reed pens in hand. Their teacher, stern and sharp-eyed, dictates lines from memory, while the children copy carefully, dipping their pens in black ink made from soot mixed with water. They do not start with grand hymns or sacred texts. Instead, they copy simple maxims. Do not speak when your superior speaks. Do not be lazy. Respect your father and mother. These moral lessons are repeated over and over, scratched onto broken shards of pottery known as ostraca. Mistakes are punished with a flick of the reed pen across the knuckles, or worse, a few strokes from a stick. But the promise of literacy is worth the pain. To be a scribe is to hold power in your hands. Words, to the Egyptians, were not mere symbols. They were magic. To know how to write was to command something eternal, and for lessons of work and skill. For most children, however, formal schooling was never an option. Their classrooms were the fields, the river, and the workshop. A boy destined to be a farmer learned to read the Nile's floods, to plant at the right time, to guide oxen with a steady hand. A girl destined to be a weaver learned how to spin flax into linen, how to dye threads, how to repair a loom. These skills were passed down patiently, parent to child, uncle to nephew, mother to daughter. Each mistake corrected not with anger but with repetition, again and again, until the hands remembered what the mind had not yet grasped. And so education was not a separate stage of life. It was woven into living itself. A child did not graduate into adulthood. They simply grew into their role, carrying the knowledge of their ancestors like a torch. Crescent mooned the power of storytelling. Yet some of the most enduring lessons came not in the daylight, but at night, when the sun dipped below the desert horizon and the air cooled. Families gathered in courtyards lit by oil lamps. This was the hour of stories. Imagine the scene. Children lying on mats, their bellies full from supper, eyes wide in the flickering firelight. The elders speak in low, rhythmic tones, their voices weaving worlds of gods, kings, and monsters. They tell of Isis, the devoted wife, who pieced together the broken body of Osiris and breathed life into him again. They tell of Horus, the falcon-headed son, who battled his uncle Set for the throne of Egypt. They tell of Ra, who sailed across the sky each day and into the underworld each night, fending off the chaos serpent Apophis. To a child, these are not just tales. They are lessons. Each story carries a truth, loyalty, courage, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Through story, children learn not only who they are, but what is expected of them. Performing arts myths, morals, and play. The stories are not always solemn. Some are playful, even mischievous. Tales of the cunning god Thoth, who tricks others with his wisdom. Fables of animals that speak, teaching lessons through their antics, much like Aesop's tale centuries later. Sometimes the children themselves act them out. A boy wraps himself in a scrap of cloth, pretending to be a mummy, chasing his sisters who squeal with laughter. Girls form a circle, singing songs about Hathor while clapping in rhythm, in play. Myth becomes living, and lessons slip into the heart like seeds planted in fertile soil. Speaking Head Proverbs and everyday wisdom. Not every lesson comes from a myth. Many come from the simple sayings that Egyptians repeated for centuries. Little nuggets of wisdom pass from mouth to ear. Do not move the boundary stone of the field. Do not speak until you are spoken to. Do not be proud of your knowledge. Consult the ignorant and the wise. Such proverbs shape behavior just as much as stories of gods. They taught humility, respect, and above all, the value of harmony in a land where survival depended on cooperation. These lessons were not abstract philosophy. They were lifelines. Candle the teacher's shadow. Education, however, was not without its shadows. Teachers, whether village elders or temple scribes, were strict. Punishments were common. A child who forgot a line of text might receive a beating. One ancient proverb bluntly states, "The ear of a boy is on his back. He listens when he is beaten." To modern ears, it sounds harsh, but in the eyes of the ancients, discipline was as necessary as water. To fail in learning was to fail in duty, and duty was what held the fragile structure of society together. Yet for every blow, there was also encouragement. A father's hand guiding his sons on the plow. A mother smiling as her daughter weaves her first usable basket. A scribe praising the careful handwriting of a diligent pupil. Globes showing Europe, Africa, preparing for life beyond the village. Through all these lessons, practical, moral, mythical, the children were being prepared, not just for survival, but for their place in the great cycle of life and death. For in Egypt, the ultimate education was not about this world alone. It was about the next. Every story of gods, every proverb about order, every skill taught by hand, and I prepare the child not only to work, but to live in harmony with Ma'at, the divine balance of the universe. When the drums of the festival have faded and the ordinary days return, the village takes on its steady rhythm once again. The fishermen return to the river, the farmers to their fields, the bakers to their ovens. But while adults work, another rhythm quietly unfolds in the shaded corners of courtyards and beneath the whispering palms, the education of the young. For in ancient Egypt, knowledge was not only a luxury for scribes in temples or the children of the wealthy. Even in a humble village, the young were shaped by the lessons of elders, by stories whispered at night, and by the steady passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. Early childhood in the village. Imagine a young boy or girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old. Their heads are shaved clean for comfort and hygiene, save for one long sidelock of hair that marks them as a child. They run barefoot through the dusty lanes, laughing with friends, splashing in the shallows of the Nile. But childhood in Egypt was short. From an early age, children were expected to help. Little girls carried water jars balanced carefully on their heads, while boys drove goats or gathered reeds from the riverbank. The village was their classroom, and survival itself was their first teacher. By watching their parents, children absorbed skills that would shape their futures. The daughter of a potter learned to shape clay with her hands. The son of a fisherman learned how to weave nets. Knowledge was not written in books, but lived, practiced, repeated until it became part of the body. Books formal learning, the path of scribes. Yet, not all learning was practical. For some children, a different path opened, the path of the scribe. Literacy in Egypt was rare and powerful, reserved for those destined to serve in temples, palaces, or administration. Picture a small mudbrick room near the temple. The village's closest thing to a school. Boys sit cross-legged on reed mats, wooden boards in their laps, reed pens in hand. Their teacher, stern and sharp-eyed, dictates lines from memory, while the children copy carefully, dipping their pens in black ink made from soot mixed with water. They do not start with grand hymns or sacred texts. Instead, they copy simple maxims. Do not speak when your superior speaks. Do not be lazy. Respect your father and mother. These moral lessons are repeated over and over, scratched onto broken shards of pottery known as ostraca. Mistakes are punished with a flick of the reed pen across the knuckles, or worse, a few strokes from a stick. but the promise of literacy is worth the pain. To be a scribe is to hold power in your hands. Words, to the Egyptians, were not mere symbols. They were magic. To know how to write was to command something eternal, and for lessons of work and skill. For most children, however, formal schooling was never an option. Their classrooms were the fields, the river, and the workshop. A boy destined to be a farmer learned to read the Nile's floods, to plant at the right time, to guide oxen with a steady hand. A girl destined to be a weaver learned how to spin flax into linen, how to dye threads, how to repair a loom. These skills were passed down patiently, parent to child, uncle to nephew, mother to daughter. Each mistake corrected not with anger but with repetition, again and again, until the hands remember what the mind had not yet grasped. And so education was not a separate stage of life. It was woven into living itself. A child did not graduate into adulthood. They simply grew into their role, carrying the knowledge of their ancestors like a torch. Crescent mooned the power of storytelling. Yet some of the most enduring lessons came not in the daylight, but at night, when the sun dipped below the desert horizon and the air cooled. Families gathered in courtyards lit by oil lamps. This was the hour of stories. Imagine the scene. Children lying on mats, their bellies full from supper, eyes wide in the flickering firelight. The elders speak in low, rhythmic tones, their voices weaving worlds of gods, kings, and monsters. They tell of Isis, the devoted wife, who pieced together the broken body of Osiris and breathed life into him again. They tell of Horus, the falcon-headed son, who battled his uncle Set for the throne of Egypt. They tell of Ra, who sailed across the sky each day and into the underworld each night, fending off the chaos serpent Apophis. To a child, these are not just tales. They are lessons. Each story carries a truth, loyalty, courage, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Through story, children learn not only who they are, but what is expected of them. Performing arts, myths, morals, and play. The stories are not always solemn. Some are playful, even mischievous. Tales of the cunning god Thoth, who tricks others with his wisdom. Fables of animals that speak, teaching lessons through their antics, much like Aesop's tale centuries later. Sometimes the children themselves act them out. A boy wraps himself in a scrap of cloth, pretending to be a mummy, chasing his sisters who squeal with laughter. Girls form a circle, singing songs about Hathor while clapping in rhythm. In play, myth becomes living, and lessons slip into the heart like seeds planted in fertile soil. Speaking head proverbs and everyday wisdom. Not every lesson comes from a myth. Many come from the simple sayings that Egyptians repeated for centuries. Little nuggets of wisdom pass from mouth to ear. Do not move the boundary stone of the field. Do not speak until you are spoken to. Do not be proud of your knowledge. Consult the ignorant and the wise. Such proverbs shape behavior just as much as stories of gods. They taught humility, respect, and above all, the value of harmony. In a land where survival depended on cooperation, these lessons were not abstract philosophy. They were lifelines. Candle the teacher's shadow. Education, however, was not without its shadows. Teachers, whether village elders or temple scribes, were strict. Punishments were common. A child who forgot a line of text might receive a beating. One ancient proverb bluntly states, "The ear of a boy is on his back. He listens when he is beaten." To modern ears, it sounds harsh, but in the eyes of the ancients, discipline was as necessary as water. To fail in learning was to fail in duty, and duty was what held the fragile structure of society together. Yet for every blow, there was also encouragement. A father's hand guiding his sons on the plow. A mother smiling as her daughter weaves her first usable basket. A scribe praising the careful handwriting of a diligent pupil. Globe showing Europe, Africa, preparing for life beyond the village. Through all these lessons, practical, moral, mythical, the children were being prepared, not just for survival, but for their place in the great cycle of life and death. For in Egypt, the ultimate education was not about this world alone. It was about the next. Every story of gods, every proverb about order, every skill taught by hand, and I prepare the child not only to work, but to live in harmony with Ma'at, the divine balance of the universe.